I would like to give the stage to Mr. Ashok Krish, Global Head of Digital Workplace at Tata Consultancy Services. His team works at the intersection of design, technology, and behavioral science and helps conceptualize and implement secure and borderless workspaces. Could I please have a warm welcome for Mr. Ashok Krish?
Good evening. And let me begin by actually sort of giving you a bit of a surprise. My name is not Ashok Krish. My name is Krish Ashok. In South India and about 1/3 of the world, including China, Japan, and Korea, the name format is given name, a surname followed by given name. But unfortunately, HR systems in 2022 still do not support anything other than the first name, last name option. So on that optimistic note about employee experience, let me begin my talk about the future of work. Right, so it is pretty obvious that we're now at a time where post-pandemic, and there has been a big reset in the fundamental definition of what employee experience essentially means. Because for the first time, companies are actually valuing their employees. In the past, we said we valued employees, but our IT budgets did not quite reflect that reality. Most euros still went to customer experience. But it was pretty obvious that companies that had a workplace experience that truly transcended borders, transcended the home to office divide, allowed for more richer, meaningful, work-out-aloud collaboration, they're the ones that did well, right? More importantly, for the first time, we started seeing the employee as more than just the transactional idea of someone you pay to do work, but really the entire individual, somebody whose other life that you actually see on screen. We've seen pets, we've seen kids, we've seen a side of the employee that is far, far more richer than the transactional idea of the employee, right? Now, what that essentially means is that for the first time, the employee experience has now taken complete center stage. And what does this mean as a CIO? Is that the historical idea that employee experience is delivered by a bunch of heterogeneous experiences run by different people, some in finance, some in HR, some in building and facility administration, and others by a range of technologies that you deploy, has really given away to this more holistic appreciation that some of the best companies are bringing to employee experience. Essentially, the fact that work-life balance is now a work-life continuum, right? And as workplaces, it is critical to understand that technology can both improve work-life and utterly destroy work-life. For any of you looking at 1,100 emails and 2,100 Teams notifications will tell you that all too often, technology is not necessarily a great recipe for mental health on the longer run. So companies that truly take this integrated view, and we've seen companies invest in what we call digital nudging technologies that allows you to really be more empathetic with the employee, to allow them to take a break when they need to. For example, we've deployed a small bot that essentially looks at your Outlook calendar, and if you have 2 hours of meetings, it will tell you to just close your eyes and take a break for 10 minutes, and so on. So these are the kinds of things that companies are starting to kind of think about. But more so than that, there is a deeper fundamental change in the very definition of work itself. From what used to be presenteeism in the office now needs to be more outcome-driven. What used to be individual expertise is now collaborative creativity. The problems of today actually require a lot more than just individual deep expertise. They actually require a culture where multiple experts can actually bounce off ideas and you can fail faster and so on. And it also means that as IT, you have to create an employee experience that is out of the world, right? For starters, it has to be friction-free, right? It has to be where you bring all of the other context and knowledge that the employee needs in a single canvas. At a CIO level, this might mean things like integrating these applications into a single canvas, be it a Office 365 or any of the other collaboration platforms that you might use. But on a more deeper philosophical note, it also means that in the war for talent, you also have to rethink what work and what employee means. Rather than just the binary between the fact that there's a full-time employee and a contractor, there is going to be a world where there will be a spectrum of ways in which you will engage with talent, right? Gig work for advanced technology skills is already here to stay, and some of the smartest people in the world in the last 2 years have become freelancers, and they will continue to stay freelancers. And the way they will engage with large organizations is going to be fundamentally different. And companies that are able to tap into the borderless nature of talent will essentially do better, right? And therefore, you need a culture that allows you to put the individual at the center. Which therefore brings me to another important point, the point about digital dexterity. As I said, individual expertise is simply not enough. We are living in times where the longer someone has expertise in a given area, the more likely their skill is going to become obsolete, as either AI or innovation in another digital area is going to completely take over that specific skill, and so on. We've seen this happen in every industry. So what digital dexterity is one, fundamentally the individual expert's ability, if you will, on the longer run to really work with AI and work with fellow human beings, right? So in a sense, AI ops is going to be the future that you need to think about. It's not just DevOps or DevSecOps, which many companies have now embraced as you kind of move away from the waterfall way of doing IT to a more agile, product-centric, employee journey way of doing IT. But the future is essentially going to be asking every individual and every team to one of the goals that they need to be given, the medium-term goal is, can you make sure that you and your team will be obsolete in a matter of years? So rather than have somebody on the outside disrupt what they do with AI, every team needs to internalize the fact that human beings should only be doing things that AI cannot do. Right? So digital dexterity is a deeper definition. At a very foundational level, you can actually measure digital dexterity. You can measure how teams are collaborating. You can look and analyze and see how graphs of how information flows, who is connected, who is not connected, who is an expert. Are you actually thinking in terms of the ecosystem, and so on. So this is digital dexterity, right? The next point is a slightly more interesting point. We also believe that companies that ground up redesign workplace rituals will do better than companies that do not. And I'm going to take a very simple offbeat example here. All of us use email, right? How many of us realize that the send button is an envelope and that the CC actually stands for carbon copy? I'd like any of you to tell me if any of your children have ever seen a carbon copy or a carbon paper in their lives. Now, the reason I make this point is the fact that a technology that has continuously evolved and we use on a day-to-day basis to collaborate still is essentially a digital equivalent of how the past worked. It's called skeuomorphism. So essentially what you're doing is that you've created a system that used to replicate the office memo system with inbox trace and outbox trace from the 1950s. Now imagine the number of processes that you have within your organization that are still designed for the past. And all you've done is apply technology, apply a better UI, applied a bunch of other technologies and buzzwords like AI and APIs and so on, and you've essentially created a digital equivalent of still past legacy processes. So I'll give you a very simple example. Workplace meetings are a great place to start rethinking what workplace rituals are. The modern day meeting is just utterly and completely broken. In TCS, for 600,000 employees, we analyzed that about 80% of all meeting minutes are unproductive. You know why they're unproductive? Because these 80% of meeting minutes involve people being on mute. So in effect, what's actually happening is that in a world where real-time decisions can be made, data can be made available to people at the point where they need to make a decision, most meetings are actually unnecessary. You need to have meetings when people need to get together and bounce off ideas with each other, not to present status, right? So this is just an example of the kinds of complete ground-up redesign that companies need to do when you design workplace rituals. Why rituals, you might ask? Religion uses rituals to encode this idea that people need to socially collaborate at large scale, have a common value system. At least that's the good bit about that, right? Workplace rituals, again, encode the culture of the company. It's essentially, if you ask someone, this is how we do things, that's exactly what a workplace ritual is. So it's important that you actually deliberately redesign many of these to be digitally native, because trust me, many of these processes are not. They're not designed for AI ops. They're not designed for collaborative creativity. They're not designed for decision-making at the edge, right? So this is one point, right? Now, which also brings me to what we call the productivity paradox, which is that every company is now using the term hybrid simply because they have no clue what they're actually going to do. It's a nice way of saying, I have no idea when I'm going to work from home, when I'm going to work from office, who's going to come from office, why are they going to come to office? And so we just use the term hybrid. The reality is that most organizations are struggling to figure out exactly what it is, based on every role, people are good at when they're actually by themselves, independent of location, versus what genuinely requires people to be together, right? And this is, in a sense, a new project management and planning skill. It is not just about dependencies and a Gantt chart, but also figuring out when am I going to co-locate and when am I going to let people work independently. And getting this right is going to be absolutely crucial. It also means that unless you make the office worth coming back for collaborative creativity, people will simply not come back, right? So, which kind of brings me to my final point, which is that you need to fundamentally rethink how IT spend works, right? A lot of the way we think about this is, again, dependent on the legacy idea of I do large projects, I find the right partner, and I do different things with different people, I find the right software stack for a specific problem, and I create all of these silos, and that's how I manage it, and so on. Essentially, the problem there is what one of the CTOs of a large insurance company in Europe once told me. It's called the beanbag problem. The beanbag problem is that many companies believe innovation will happen when you essentially change one part of the office to include beanbags and funky lighting, whereas the other part of the office essentially has traditional seating. That's operations, and this is innovation, right? So the problem is that unless innovation is built in to the way you work, if incremental innovation is the goal of every team, as I said, every team needs to figure out a way that AI will either do significant portions of what they do or make them entirely obsolete. You will really not be able to achieve the kind of competitive edge and the cultural edge to be able to attract, retain talent in a world where tech talent is always going to be scarce. On that note, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Krish Ashok. And I hope you can forgive me for mixing up your name.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Krish Ashok.